Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on automation in food manufacturing. I'm Nithya Caleb, editor at Annex Business Media, Canada's largest B2B media company. And I'm here as your host on behalf of Food in Canada. Before I introduce today's panelist and moderator, I have a few housekeeping details to go through. First, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Biomera, for their help in making this webinar possible. To our participants, if you're watching along with us, the audience is in listen-only mode. We will be taking questions throughout the discussion, so feel free to drop a question at any time using the Q&A button on your Zoom window. If we don't have enough time to get to your question, we will follow up via email. We are recording today's session, and all registered participants will get an email with a link to the recording in the next few days. With that, I'd like to welcome our panelists. Our moderator for today's webinar is Jim Beretta. He's president of Customer Traction, a marketing consulting company. Jim works with automation integrators, manufacturers, robot companies, and the automation community around the world. He's a speaker and moderator at marketing at industry conferences and is also an expert at marketing and branding. He also operates the Robot Industry podcast. Sean Wells is Business Development Manager for Food and Beverage Industry, JMP Solutions, a Convergex automation company. Since 1998, Sean has been working in the robotics and automation market. From 2012, he has been working specifically in the food and beverage segment on packaging line solutions, as well as upstream primary food handling applications. Nadia Andrew-Chow, RD, is the operations director at Henry's Tempeh, a manufacturer of Canadian organic tempeh. Nadia is passionate about her multidisciplinary role, where she executes business and plant operations and everything in between. She has recently coordinated several projects that have increased the level of automation within the business's production process, which in turn increased plant efficiency and reduced product loss. Wayne McIntyre is the founder and CEO of Relocalize, a supply chain technology company decarbonizing food supply chains with autonomous microfactories. With over 20 years of experience helping technology companies accelerate their growth, he has a diverse background in strategy, law, and technology, and has a proven track record of leading successful growth transformations, building commercial teams, and developing and implementing growth and M&A strategies for both large and small technology companies. Thank you, panelists, for joining us today. I'm going to pass the floor over to Jim to kickstart the discussion.
Thank you, Nithya. Before we get started, I want to introduce my podcast, the Robot Industry Podcast, where we discuss automation, robotics, and advanced manufacturing, and often promote Canadian technology. You can listen to the Robot Industry Podcast wherever you pick up your podcasts, and we would be happy to have you subscribe. And personally, I'm a big fan of podcasts. I love them, and that's one of the reasons I got involved in this one. I had a fun experience last year working with CFIN, Canadian Food Innovation Network. We created a presentation called Robotics in Action, Seeing is Believing, and we present some of the technology that involves food, robotics, and automation. So check it out. It's on YouTube. And if you can't find it, connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'll send you the coordinates. In this slide, you're seeing some of the technologies that are used in automation. The grippers on the left-hand side, or end-of-arm tools, are made by a company called Soft Robotics. And the photo on the right is a robot which is specifically designed for food in the packaging industry called a Delta robot. Delta robots have a very small mass at the end of the robot and have a very big reach and are great for food and packaging. And I'm sure Sean is very used to this particular robot. Compared to other industries, the robot industry has been very slow to adapt and invest in automation for a few reasons. Aside from expense, early robots were often slow, they were complex to integrate, and often not as dependable. Despite the fact that using robots improves food safety, manufacturers are comfortable with human labor, and when they needed to ramp up, they just hired more people. And for those people who are older on the call, they remember manpower, they just used to call them. However, now the shortage of labor in North America, companies have had to look at other ways to maintain productivity and delivery while reducing costs and keeping quality high. So I want to mention to you as well an example of automation and artificial intelligence before we get started in the webinar. This application of automation by a company called Vuban out of Quebec City. They recently helped a Quebec-based potato farmer use AI to get the right potato to the consumer, restaurant, or potato chip manufacturers by analyzing potato size and quality, saving them a substantial amount of money, time, and labor. And you can check these out on YouTube. That's where I found this image. It's Dolbeck Potatoes and Vuban. So now I'm going to turn the floor over to Nadia. So Nadia, please go ahead.
Awesome. Thanks, Jim. So thanks everyone for having me. Really looking forward to speaking to you today. So like Jim said, my name is Nadia Andrew-Chow, and I'm the operations director at Henry's Tempeh. So, okay, awesome. So today I'm going to touch a little bit about who we are as a company, some of the automation hurdles we've faced as an SME, what the first thing we automated was, and then where we're at now in our automation journey. So Henry's Tempeh is actually Canada's largest tempeh manufacturer. For those of you who aren't familiar with tempeh, tempeh is a fermented food made from soybeans, and it's actually a plant-based source of protein. So it's a great replacement for any sort of meat you're eating. It's really good and like marinated, fried, barbecue, baked, anything you can think of. So our business actually ran as a small-scale operation that focused on small batch artisan tempeh from 2002 to 2016. At which point new owners were brought on that brought forth engineering and technical expertise that led to explosive capacity growth. And that was through automating our manufacturing process. So some of the hurdles that we faced is, as you can see from our timeline, it actually took 14 years to scale up our process and automate. And this is because automation requires significant capital injection. We're a bootstrap business. So we actually had to kind of like save and gather the cash and reinvest it into the business to scale up. We also, our requirement was to have in-house expertise to maintain all our equipment and machinery. We also required manufacturing expertise to scale up production. So tempeh is a finicky product. Because it's fermented, there are tons of parameters that could affect the quality and safety and taste of the product. So we really needed to have someone who understands the manufacturing process for tempeh in order to actually scale up. And then, of course, it required the demand to justify expansion. So we had to have the accounts lined up to actually support our scale up. The first thing we automated was actually fairly simple. It was our packaging machine. It's hard to believe, but for the majority of our business life, we had a person hand packaging the tempeh and sealing it with like a little hand vacuum sealer. I can't even imagine that right now, but it was a really big game changer for us to just automate this aspect of our manufacturing line. And you can go forward, Jim. We saw a massive reduction in labor and a higher throughput. So it just completely changed the game for us in terms of our capacity to produce per day. So where we're at now is we're actually currently automating our fermentation system. And this has been with the support of grants from the Canadian Food Innovation Network, BioEnterprise Canada, and Innovation Guelph. And our goal with this is actually to minimize the amount of human intervention in our fermentation system that's required to produce a quality tempeh. And by doing that, we'll also reduce waste in our manufacturing process and reduce the amount of energy that we're using, because the fermentation process is kind of like a long length of time process. So we're really excited about that. It's been definitely a journey, but it's going very well so far. So just some case takeaways, if there's any people from some SMEs who are thinking about scaling up or automating their manufacturing process, the financial structure of your business matters. So if you're bootstrapped, it's going to take a long time to amass the capital to actually invest in automating your manufacturing process. Or if you have investors, then that will enable you to do it a lot faster. Also, consider where you're going to find your expertise. Are you going to lean on consultants, or do you need someone in-house to be able to support your manufacturing line? And then also, I highly recommend leveraging funding programs. There's a lot out there right now to support SMEs to strengthen the Canadian food supply chain, especially after the impact that COVID had. And then finally, is there demand to support the investment? So do you have a product that consumers want? Do you actually have the demand to support investing in automation? So I'm going to leave you with some delicious pictures of tempeh, and thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Nadia. Thank you for that presentation. And I'll bring Sean Wells on now to talk a little bit about what you're seeing here on the screen. Come on, Sean.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate the opportunity to participate in the webinar. What you're seeing on the screen is a wide range of automation relative to food, what we would call food manufacturing, which is always a broad term. You got to be a little careful how you apply that one. But I think traditionally, automation, robotics in particular, has always played a heavy role at the end of the line. Nadia touched on it, that the packaging solution, robotic or what I would call traditional mechanical, those solutions have been around for a long time. The process is pretty mature and there's a little bit lower risk. And at JMP, we do participate in those processes. Palletizing, case packing, very traditional, very common. They've been around for the better part of 25 plus years in the robotic space, as well as mechanical automation solutions. Outside of the screen freezing, but essentially there are some of the other things, and we'll show some other video, but what's been a major trend lately and where JMP has seen a lot of increase in business, not just for JMP, but in the market sector, is that upstream processing, the handling of raw material. And Jim, you touched on it briefly in one of your slides. Soft robotics is an excellent example of what we would call an OEM, a supplier of automation components, developing and designing equipment specifically for this industry. And that had been missing prior to 2010, 2008. There were a lot of moves to say, well, we'll take a regular robot and put a jacket on it versus, hey, we'll design the robot to survive in that environment where you have hygienic washdown processes that happen nightly or daily or every other shift or things of that nature. And Jim, you also mentioned some of the chemicals can be pretty caustic. You have to design the equipment, everything from coating of the surface, stainless steel surfaces, electrical cables, connectors, all of that needs to survive for years in that environment. If you want to go to the next slide.
I could if I would. Hold on just a second.
Oh boy.
I'm going to have to just end the show for 1 sec. And
we killed it.
that was a pretty good slide, but unfortunately it killed it. So,
no problem. Yeah, that's what I get for putting lots of videos in one space. But while you're double checking and rebooting there, I would say again, another thing you touched on, it was briefly mentioned before we got on the webinar. One of the things JMP does is using the automation as part of the control process, meaning the robots participate in the CIP or the clean in place process, and some of the benefits that come along with that, which include you're using the same amount of CIP, which is not an expensive solution. It's a predictable amount now. Other things that better the benefits that can come from that is you're making sure you're getting into hard to reach places potentially in the machine, little niches, tough to reach places that your third shift CIP team may not always do a great job of. But automating those processes really, really helps control that. And by definition, by automating it, you get the control over that process, and it's repeatable. And you don't have, you can sleep a little sounder at night knowing that you'll have a clean environment when you fire up on first shift for your processing. Actually, I do see a question in the Q&A. The question is, can you speak to working out the ROI, the return on investment, to justify automation? And Nadia touched on this too. I think this very much depends on the size of your business and how you do your capital expenditure planning, which is usually the budget that you would fund new equipment out of, packaging machine, things like that. A lot of our customers are Fortune 1000 customers. They are dealing with multi-million-dollar quarterly CapEx budgets that are very large and encompass a lot of different areas. What we typically see, and when I say we, I mean JMP, a 2-year return on investment is a very common target. I see them go out as far as 5 years. I've worked on projects where return on investment was measured in weeks. So there is a pretty long range of how quickly do we want this to pay back. But specific to the question of metrics, what are the things we see in ROI? Traditionally, it's been headcount reduction, which they don't really say headcount reduction anymore. They say headcount redeployment. It's so hard to find good, reliable employees that you rarely want to eliminate the employees from payroll. What you want to do is reallocate them to something where they can use their brain a little more. They're a little more effective or difficult to automate processes. So that's a piece of the puzzle. If I'm moving one person per shift, that has a value to the company. If I'm moving 4 people per shift, that has another value, and that becomes part of your ROI calculation. In the last few years, something I see very frequently is unreliable workforce, which is a really nice way of saying we cannot run the plant at 100% or even 80% because we can only staff to 60% production needs. So they will assign a value to being able to run with fewer people on the line, knowing that they'll get more out of the line on a day or a shift basis. But there are a lot of metrics that go into ROI and how people quantify that payback and look at that from I would call it a dollars and cents perspective. But for this slide, just for those who don't know JMP is based in London, Ontario. The robotics division, automation and robotics division, has a manufacturing facility there. We have our core engineering staff there, as well as others. I'm actually remote. I'm over in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, but we have sales and support offices throughout North America, 16 in total. And then we also have another facility in Fayetteville, Arkansas, specifically to service the food customers in that region. For those who don't know, that is not only where Walmart headquarters is located, that's also where Tyson headquarters is located. There are lots of manufacturing facilities in that immediate Northwest Arkansas region, including ConAgra, Smithfield, Cargill, some of the larger, very high volume customers that JMP has. Next slide, please. And then it was mentioned briefly, and this is something new. This happened in the last 18 months or so. JMP was purchased. We are part of a larger umbrella company, as I like to describe it, called Convergix. And between JMP, Classic Design, and a company called AGR, we have multiple locations throughout the world, including engineering services and fabrication services in India. AGR is based in Scotland with locations in Ireland as well. And then Classic Design, again, all focused on automation. Classic is based in Troy, Michigan. Next slide, please. So we just put a couple of slides together versus the montage slide, which can be a little overwhelming, but a couple of slides with very specific applications. And what we find frequently, this is an example of, you may recognize the trays that are moving underneath. So when you go to the grocery store and your kids want I'll call them, to keep, to not use specific brand names, the kitted lunch, where you might have a little stack of turkey, a little stack of crackers, maybe a candy bar, or maybe there's a fourth component, or nachos, or a little pizza kit. Over the years, those types of pre-prepared food packages have become really popular. This is even going before COVID. This has been a pretty high market volume area. And early on, as is with most things, these were manual processes, right? Operators were filling these trays out and then sending them through the packaging line to be sealed and case packed and palletized. As volume goes up and the labor pool goes down, there is much more interest in how do we automate these processes. So at 125 trays a minute, how do you locate, pick up, and place these stacks of ham or turkey or salami or bologna? How do you do that accurately? And on top of that, if you notice, the trays never stop moving. It's a continuous motion process. So from an automation perspective, there's multiple things going on. There's cameras finding what you want to pick. There's encoders tracking the trays, things of that nature, but lots of things going on, all in an environment where you have to be able to wash that down every night with some pretty strong chemicals from depending on the particular locations. Next slide, please. Another example where you've got, believe it or not, robots making burritos. So there's a couple different places where we automate this process. Some of it is mechanical, some of it is robotically driven, but again, this is a process that before we arrived and worked with the customer, these were hand fed by operators. So these are frozen burritos that come out of a spiral freezer tunnel. And people used to feed the little conveyor, we call it a lug chain conveyor, with these frozen burritos. Now, the operators who wear gloves, everyone is hygienically safe, but there's always that opportunity. Every time you add a person into the process for contamination, for something to go wrong, for scrap product to be created, by automating the process, we let the customer redeploy the 4 operators that used to occupy the same space and kind of do this monotonous, really tough on your brain type of process. They were able to redeploy those operators into some other areas of the plant to do some more difficult applications, and truthfully, probably kept the operators a little more engaged in their work. You can imagine how hard it is for HR people to retain operators who just want to load frozen burritos into a conveyor all day. So automating this process at 150 pieces per minute, again, in that washdown environment. Next slide, please. This was this one's been this is on YouTube, so we've gotten lots of interesting feedback on this one. For those who are in the market for single serve things, and I hate to demote or demean the product, but this is typically gas station type food, for lack of a better term. But on the go, in the package, you just need to heat it up. It's been pre-cooked. It's ready to go. You literally just need to make it hot, if you even need to do that. We automated an entire sandwich assembly solution, and that includes separating the buns top from bottom, and then, like the human operators used to do, building that product out. That could mean adding cheese. That could mean adding a hamburger patty. That could mean a chicken breast. Could be grilled, could be breaded. These types of applications 15 years ago, a lot of the equipment really did not exist to do these types of applications. As, again, the OEMs, and I would include the robot builders, the Fanucs, the KUKAs, the ABBs of the world, all of them, they've recognized the need in this market, and they've brought product forward that really lets the integrators apply it properly and tailor it to the specific need and solution. And again, at high rates. I believe this one runs at approximately 75 sandwiches per minute. We're completing a system on the floor right now that runs at twice that speed. It's always shocking to me how many things we consume as humans and the rates that you have to produce things at to keep up with market demand. Next slide, please. And real fast, I see there's a Q&A question. Burritos, is there automated kickout of substandard product? Excellent point. Ian, I might have to put you on the payroll. You've actually walked right into this slide. So yes, inspection is always a part of the process. As a matter of fact, we challenge our customers frequently when they say, hey, we just want to pick and place something. The first thing we say is, what else is the operator doing? Because odds are they are not just picking and placing. They are watching for breading that's cracked. They are watching for something. They are making a quick adjustment based on a flaw in the product that came from upstream. For new users or people considering implications for automation, always really understand the process. It is almost never as simple as I pick something up and I set something down. Far more often, it's understanding the process, and the robotic motion is really just a piece of the process. It's maybe 20% of what you're trying to solve. The rest of it is much more complicated. In the video on the screen, I think everybody knows the product. We're using laser scanners as well as vision systems, not only to tell the robot where to pick the product, but if the robot is actually rejecting product, good product is allowed to continue. So this solution specifically takes deformed, misshapen 2 paper cups instead of 1, underfill, overfill, lots of things can go wrong in confectionery. And we reject that product so that they can recycle the product, and then actually feeds right back into the upstream process, and they come through again, hopefully made correctly this time. Next question. Next slide, sorry. And I am keeping one eye on the Q&A. I'll jump in and out of that. I think this is one of the last ones. Primary tray loading. So this will be product I think most people can relate to that they see in the grocery store, but what's not realized, I think, by a lot of people is when you buy a New York strip or a 1 pound ground beef and it's on the plastic foam tray and it's shrink wrapped, it is very common to have a small army of workers packaging that product and then processing it downstream. So, and I'm just throwing round numbers out here, but 10 people on one side of a conveyor, 10 people on another side of a conveyor, product coming down the middle, and those operators are watching the product, looking at it, make sure it's good, and then putting it on the tray and sending the tray down the line. Very common, even today. Again, as the technology has gotten better and more affordable, automating those processes becomes very important. What this video shows is picking and placing of trays, and in this case, steaks. What is not as apparent here is we're actually sorting those steaks based on color, shape, and there are some certain defects that we watch for that are sellable product, but you can only have one on a tray, for example, if it has a vein in a certain spot or something visual. And we accommodate all of those parameters in the process of automating. And then again, I think this is the last slide, but I'm doing lots of talking. Using robots to participate in the CIP process. And this is something JMP has been doing for a number of years now, and it's somewhat unique in the industry. But letting the robots wash the equipment down on the back shift. And the back shift is usually your middle of the night operation. The whole room is very humid, very high temperatures. It's not uncommon to use 120 degree, 200 degree water. And then that's mixed with chemicals. So there's a dilution percentage and things of that nature that go into making sure you're not growing bacteria. You don't have things that will contaminate your product forming on any of the automation at any point. In the old days, it was very common to do what's called fire hosing, where you just came in and hosed everything down. And by volume, you hope you got everywhere you needed to get. Over the past 20 years or so, there have been recalls make the news, and nobody wants the lost product of a recall or the bad press as far as, hey, are you putting out a safe product? Is it okay to eat so-and-so's product from this location? So there is a very, very hyper focus, a scrutiny almost on that CIP process and making sure any automation introduced into the area where you have raw product or ready to eat product meets the criteria for, depending on your country, FDA in the United States, but even individual customers have fairly high above the government standards for keeping things clean and safe for their products. Next slide. Oh, I think this is the last one. This one's a little more traditional. It's not quite as sexy if you ask me, but still very cool. So we had a customer who said, hey, I've got 8 manufacturing lines. I need to, I have 2 people at the end of each line who stand there, two 10-hour shifts and stack cardboard boxes on pallets. Fork truck comes over, full pallet comes out, empty pallet is placed in, and these people continue the process. So large labor resource, lots of work, very monotonous work. This is not high skill requirement work. It's very tough to staff those positions. So we were able to design palletizing solution that fit into the very tight space. It takes up a little more room than the humans. I think one of the questions I always get is, can you get robots in the same spot as a human? Not always possible, but that's always the goal. But in this case, we had to take product from the floor, elevate it up and over. So operators had access to the lines upstream. They could get to labelers, they could get to weigh checkers, they could get to other things they have to get to as part of their job. But the product got to the palletizing robots where the robots take care of stacking the product, building those pallet loads, and then it automatically sending it over to stretch wrapping. And we are tracking and tracing all of this, barcode readers, all that's important to the process. and it automatically goes in. So the fork truck traffic goes away for the most part, and all of those operators can be redeployed to do things that are maybe a little easier on their bodies, for one, from an ergonomic perspective, but also a little more engaging. It makes it easier to retain those employees. Real quick, in the Q&A, there were 2 questions. What's the technology advancement that enabled these sandwich pick and place robotics that wasn't possible years ago? Example, vision, image processing, mechanical. The robotic grippers, compliant grippers. Soft robotics is an example, but there are many out there. The ability to pick something up and place something down that is never the same shape twice or works within a certain space. That is a powerful tool in allowing robots to do what humans do. Vision, also absolutely a part of that. What we do now with vision software tools and how we integrate those with robotic solutions is radically different than even 10 years ago, and extremely different than 20 years ago. And then last question, can you speak to how cobots are changing the nature, costs, and use cases for automation? I could do a whole dissertation on cobots, so I'll distill this to something very brief. Cobots have opened up a whole new space in the marketplace. That's a whole different realm of, is it right or is it wrong for your application? And I'll be happy to handle those at the end. That's a tricky topic.
Thank you, Sean.
Yeah, no problem.
And Wayne, I think you're up next.
So thanks, Jim. I appreciate it. Thanks, everybody, for joining today. Looking forward to telling you a bit about Relocalize. Our presentation is going to be a little bit different. I think we're not going to spend as much time on robot videos because much of what we're producing is still proprietary and unpatented. I think we'll talk a little bit more about outcomes. And I mean, before I jump into that, I want to talk a little bit about what we call a big green elephant in the room in most food boardrooms, most food meeting rooms these days. And that green elephant in the room is really sustainability. It's something all of us want. It's something that all of us know is important, and it's becoming more and more important to consumers. But there's a big problem with sustainability. And I think it's a problem that automation really has a potential to solve. That big problem is the reality of cost. And next slide, please, Jim. When you look at 2 different types of products, you've got a mass market product, and I've hidden the brands here and I'm not picking on lettuce. It really is true for all food products. When you talk about a mass market product that's affordable consumers versus a locally produced by robots type of product like the one on the right, what you'll find is there's a massive difference in price. And if you wouldn't mind clicking on the button there, Jim, that price difference is a 338% premium. Now, there are some people that can afford that, but if we're really going to affect change, if we're going to get outcomes that we want in food, like increasing sustainability, we need to make sustainability accessible. And that means making sustainability affordable. And I think this is where robotics and automation can really have a huge impact and make it possible to not only be sustainable, but also be affordable. Next, please, Jim. So we build autonomous food and beverage microfactories. These are microfactories designed to be located at retailer distribution centers, and they make food at the same place that food travels out to either the store or the customer. By locating it there, you eliminate middle mile logistics, you eliminate carbon, and you also eliminate a ton of supply chain complexity, supply chain cost, and supply chain risk. And maybe we'll jump into the video now, Jim, if you could, just to give people a little sense. And Nadia, if you wouldn't mind muting, because I know the video stalled in our practice run when people were unmuted.
Food and beverage supply chains are too complex. They're unsustainable, insecure, and expensive. Conventional centralized production was the only affordable solution. Until now. Meet Relo, an autonomous microfactory that makes, packages, palletizes, and warehouses in this microfactory. At distribution centers, shrinking all upstream supply chain steps and eliminating all middle mile transportation. This plus automation means product costs drop and retailers capture more of the value chain while meeting ESG objectives, creating a one-stop journey from DC to store or consumer. Today, Relo is disrupting the multi-billion-dollar packaged ice industry. Why? The ice industry has remained unchallenged for decades, transporting water on trucks, but worst of all, environmentally and economically unsustainable. Relocalized ice is simply better. Bigger, longer lasting cubes. It takes up 35% less space in the fridge or cooler and is vacuum sealed for freshness. But most importantly, it eliminates up to 90% of transportation CO2, and that's the opportunity. Today, it's better ice. Tomorrow, it's better beverages. The future is better products in every aisle. Produced hyperlocally and autonomously on demand by a distributed network of relos, thousands working together. An autonomous, hyperlocal, and networked food and beverage supply system. That's Relo. Talk to us.
So that's just a little overview of what we're up to. And I think we're a mission-driven company. And really what makes everything we're doing in terms of supply chain transformation possible is automation. In order to make distributed production feasible and economically viable, it needs to be autonomous. And I'm sure Sean can talk more on this, on the challenges of autonomy. But ultimately, I think the big challenge that we have faced is most automation equipment and equipment that supplies food producers is made for a large environment, and it's made to have people nearby when things go down. And this has really been the big change for us. We take a big factory, all the aspects that go in it, many of the things that Sean was showing from production, through to package making, package forming, packaging, material handling, food safety, palletizing, all the different aspects of what happened in a large factory that all happen here. But they have to happen not just here, but in hundreds, if not thousands of different locations where they can be monitored and controlled autonomously. So this is really this is what we've built here at Relo, and I'm excited to say I'm in Florida right now, and very soon we'll be announcing that actually the world's first fully autonomous microfactory for the food and beverage industry will be making product, and it will be on shelves.
Very cool, Wayne.
Thank you.
Next slide.
And that's it. Just a quick overview of the company, but happy as we move along to take a few questions if anybody's interested in hearing more.
Actually, we're going to leave the questions till the end. So that's so we'll go to the next slide. So, and these are the panel questions. What are some of the big challenges for food and automation today, and what's keeping your customers up at nights? And Sean, I think that you kind of did a really good presentation here, but what are the top one or two things that they're wondering about? Is it filling that second and third shift?
Labor, I think, is a big topic, and I would say it's not exclusive to the food industry. Try hiring really good mechanical engineers right now, or really good controls engineers. It's a challenge, but I can tell you, I never traveled as much as I did during COVID. As much of a logistical nightmare as that was, because the food manufacturing market really had a lot of pressure on it to get product out the door. People were eating at home. They needed, we don't all have gardens that we can lean on 24/7, but at the same time, large percentages of their workforce were sick or couldn't show up, or they simply had people were not coming to work in this environment. We're not doing this at this time. And it really crimped their labor available work pool. Some of that had been going on even pre-COVID, but COVID shined a pretty heavy spotlight on it.
Yes.
And we hear that frequently from customers. It's not the only concern. I'd say another one is, and this was touched on, I think, at a few others, but the safety aspect. How many people do you want touching the product before it goes out the door, so to speak? The more you can control and minimize that, the less chance of recall, contamination, and everything that goes along with that.
Thank you for that. And I think we'll switch to Nadia now, because you're in the depths of this, right? Some of your big challenges, obviously labor and labor savings and safety. What else?
Yeah, I'd say for us, one of the biggest challenges is just justifying the cost based on demand. It's just so important. And then also balancing the speed of getting to market with, the way you want to finance your business. So there's just so many moving parts in kind of deciding what parts of a manufacturing process to automate. And you kind of have to have a justification for every single step of the way. So that's really the big challenge is doing that planning, but then also you're sometimes taking a bit of a gamble as to whether or not there actually is going to be an ROI on your investment. Because with human labor, it's easier to, unfortunately, we would never want to do this, but it's easier to kind of have to cut a position if you don't have the demand than if you buy this multi hundreds of thousands of dollar machine or up to $1 million. What do you do with it if you don't have the demand? So it's definitely hard balancing all of those risks.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. And Wayne, from your perspective, I mean, you're kind of in this weird place, right? You're creating a solution, but you still have challenges with food and automation.
Absolutely. Ultimately, we're taking the whole value chain upstream of the retailer. So not only building the technology, but we have to run it. So we experience exactly I think some of the problems that Sean Shea faces, as well as what Nadia faces. And I'd say for us, the biggest challenge in creating a new technology for distributed production is that many of the technologies are just not mature yet. So there's a lot of stuff that we have to build and develop. I'll just throw out one example. If you're going to put something in the field and it's going to be there by itself, you need to have pretty strong predictive maintenance capabilities. We're fortunate now with Internet of Things technology, AI, machine learning, you can do a lot more with predictive maintenance than you can. You could say 15 or 20 years ago. I used to run a company that did predictive maintenance in the aerospace world. And what we can do now is just so much more. But at the same time, much of the technology you need when you want to do something new is not off of a shelf, which means you need to find great experts and you need to be prepared for the fact that it's an iterative process when you innovate. The first version will not be perfect. You'll have to go through some cycles, and that can be very expensive and create some risk in the project.
Yes, and of course, your microfactories, they're not manned, right? These are autonomous factories without people in them.
Exactly, because I think the economics are really good for what we're doing, particularly because we're focused on high throughput products that are very heavy and expensive to ship. But if you have to put people on every site, it's a lot less efficient than centralized production. And the other side of things is, if your equipment is going down on a regular basis, because you have no people there, product availability becomes a challenge. And if you ask any retailer, what's the most important thing to them? Availability, right? And so this is really where a lot of the tech we're developing is really addressing those problems to make it possible to make food without people, which, as Sean said, is also very, very positive from a food safety perspective, because there are a lot of things you can do in a microfactory with no people, and the number one source of contamination in any product is people.
Thank you for that. And Alex, if you can click twice, because I think we've already handled question 2. So we'll go right to question 3. And it's about technology. So, and we've all kind of touched on this, right? Automated inspection, vision, laser, remote diagnostics, and even robotics. Nadia, you're up next for this question. What are some of your perspective on some of the tech that you're installing?
Well, for us, when I mentioned our fermentation project, automating that process, it's extremely useful, and it's kind of a game changer for us. So using some special systems to actually be able to look at the quality of the product before we take it out of the fermentation process, it's kind of a game changer for us. Some of the videos that were shown, I was just like, oh, this looks so amazing. But a lot of it for us is actually not that attainable because it does require significant investment. But we kind of do what we can in implementing some of the more advanced technologies to improve our process. And as we grow as a company, we're hoping to kind of make it even more and more enhanced to help with that, especially with the fermentation, because it does require so much human intervention. But as I mentioned, is very science-based, so we can easily control it if we have the right technology. So that's kind of where we're at.
And thank you for that. And yeah, you're right. When you're making product, but you're making product that's fermenting, it is just that one more thing that you need extra IoT and extra sensors and extra
Mhm.
of everything, it seems. Wayne, you're kind of up next for this question too. And we've already talked a little bit about remote diagnostics. Is there anything else that you're investing heavily at your company?
Absolutely. I mean, we're really investing in pretty much any of the hot techs right now that are happening in the automation industry, whether you're talking about AI, whether you're talking about data, sensing technology, vision, kicking out bad product from your process and things like that. These are all critically important to us. And I think it's pretty exciting that it's actually possible right now, because just 5 years ago or even 10 years ago, we were facing two challenges when we were looking at automation in and around food. One was, could you actually do it? Did the technology exist? And the second one was, could you afford it? And I think what's really exciting right now, for food automation, is suddenly automation is a fraction of the cost, down as little as 25% is what it was 10 years ago. And at the same time, it's easier to use, and there are more, say, vision type technologies available that you don't have to build it all from the ground up. It could be more of an integration exercise. So I guess my big takeaway would be on all of these technologies you have listed here, the exciting thing is, this is really the inflection point, start of that hockey stick, in my opinion, for automation in food.
And I think too, robots have not only have they tripled in complexity, but they've also kind of stayed the same price or become even a better value for manufacturers too.
Oh, you're 100% right. And I think, when we look at what we put into our micro factories, in many cases, the articulated robots are a commodity now for us. And what that means is, one, they're affordable, two, they're reliable, and three, we can focus on the innovative bits and leave the more, and work with some proven, safe, affordable technology providers for all of the more, the stuff that's more broadly available in the market.
And I see Sean shaking his head on that. So from a high level, Sean, what are some of your technologies that you're integrating at JMP?
Yeah, I would say definitely robots being more affordable, and more variants of the robots, and the ability to get the robots into environments that were difficult to do before. That suits itself well to food manufacturing. But outside of the robots themselves, the vision systems have come an incredibly long ways. I remember writing code just to make locations go back and forth between a controller. Many of those things, those are canned functions now, and you're not spending so much time making it work. You're spending time tweaking it or customizing it specific to the customer needs. And that brings things to market faster. It lets you develop the solution faster. And to be honest, it makes everything go a lot smoother. It minimizes risk, but also, and we hit on it a couple of times, I'll give them the free pitch, but companies like Soft Robotics, and in parallel, there's a few others, bringing tools to the automation space that allow you to grab things that aren't consistent. It's not loading and unloading a machine tool where I have a nice machined part that comes out the same way every time. Steaks are all over the place. Shrimp come in a lot of different sizes. Salmon cuts. Think of how food looks and how proteins are manufactured. That ability to literally get and hold on to different shapes, sizes, weights. There's a lot more tools in the marketplace now for the machine builders than there used to be. 10 years ago, you were kind of on your own to develop that, and it takes a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of effort.
And we haven't really talked about this, and maybe that's another webinar, but proteins are really at the top of the pyramid when it comes for automation companies. Obviously, you showed a food and beverage application, but it's very, very popular. And that's a segue for our next question. And this question is for Nadia. So Nadia, what kind of important lessons have you learned in your experience and from, I don't know, project management to budget to financing? And you can go to the next slide.
Yeah, it's a really great question. We've definitely learned a lot of lessons as a business with this whole process of, automating just different aspects of our line. I would say that the team really, really matters. So having everyone on board, having a good vision and a good plan, but then also really doing the solid planning, making sure that everyone understands it, from the people who are actually going out and, changing the floor to be like the new system. That just everyone has to have a super clear and united vision on what you're doing. Because if you don't have that, then it's going to be very difficult. You also have to have buy-in from everyone on the team. So that's from everyone from, the people doing production who are super important to the business, at least for our business, up to the top. So, it's a team effort that involves everyone. And also I want to mention that you can build that team also with external players to your organization. It doesn't have to be necessarily everyone within your organization. So like leading on people from different organizations, or some of the implementation people who can help you with it. So that's one of the main thing. Trying to think of anything else. It's really, all about planning, all about figuring out if you actually can justify it, and then making sure there's buy-in from everyone on your team and having everyone on board. But I'd say I'm a planner, so the planning it all out, mapping it all out, following up as you go is just so important, because you can catch mistakes before they happen, because they do happen, because there's such a long chain of communication between the people who are actually doing the work to the people who are planning it. So yeah, that's kind of my big takeaways from our experiences.
And Nadia, how was the culture? Was it fairly open to automation? I kind of call it the culture of automation. How did that go at your place?
I'd say for sure, because our product is quite labor intensive to produce. So it's, it's like a 2-day process to produce the product. So having different parts of the manufacturing process be a little bit easier for the staff was definitely something that was very welcomed. It's not fun. The jobs are very monotonous when you're sealing every single little piece of tempeh. And then also we always try to make sure that if anyone's hours are affected by the fact that we now have an automated system in place, we're going to reallocate their hours to something else that will be more rewarding for them, and also benefit the business.
Thank you for that. And we're going to move on to the next question. And Sean, I'm going to have you up for this question. How important is Industry 4.0 and data to a lot of your customers?
Industry 4.0 is an interesting term. I've heard this. It paints with a broad brush. I'll put it that way. It covers an incredible number of topics. So I'll defer slightly to the data word and focus to that. Data is hugely important. What we have found is we help customers automate some of these processes, many of which have never been automated before, as automation is moving upstream from the end of the line. The customer is getting data whether they want it or not. So how many packages, how many steaks did the robot touch? I'll keep using that as a common example. And how many were dropped? How many weren't dropped? When we did our inspections and we sorted by color or size or weight or all three, how is that sorting out? That data is important to the customers as they analyze what's coming into the facility in the raw ingredients sections. What I found is some customers do a better job of what I like to call distilling or breaking the data down quickly into eatable chunks. It's very easy to be overwhelmed by a ton of data, and all this information comes in. And if you don't have a fast way, like a simple dashboard or a web page that quickly indicates, hey, some corrective action needs to happen now to make sure we don't do 3 more hours of the wrong thing or slightly wrong thing, that can be a challenge for customers. But the data is really important. And even at the simple process of track and trace, we just want to know what went out the door exactly when with a timestamp. By definition, automation brings that to the table. It's the effectively using the data. I think there's a lot of learning still going on there.
Thank you. Wayne, I'm going to ask you the same question, and we're getting close to that magic hour. But it must be critically important to a microfactory is this micro data.
Absolutely. Well, whether you call it factory of the future or smart factory, or and we talked about data, all of these things, it's just not possible without it, right? And I think, as Sean said as well, we produce just this massive volume of data, and it's a tool that It makes it possible to do things like manage inventory, supply chain visibility, do predictive maintenance, remote fault detection, all kinds of different possibilities. But I mean, how do you drink from that fire hose is the challenge. And I mean, I think, I saw one comment in the chat too, how do you bring all these things together and make them work? You need a really strong team and some really strong expertise and some really real world applied robotics experience to actually make these things work, because sometimes it sounds easy, but it's really not.
Thank you. And Nadia, for you, having this automation is new to you, how strongly focused are you on data at Henry Stempa?
We're kind of starting with that, especially with the fermentation project that we're working on. That's where we're really leaning on data that we collect to actually, build our system. So we're kind of starting that whole process, but I imagine as we go forward in the future, it's going to become a larger and larger part of our business. And there's also a lot of other things in our manufacturing process that we could use more data to actually implement different systems and improve the process, but we're just not quite there yet.
I'm going to keep you on this question. If I had a crystal ball, and we're going to go to the next question, if I had a crystal ball, what would you like to see in the future for automation in food?
Me, okay, so yeah, that's a really great question. It's I would like to see it be, as technology progresses and becomes less and less of a spend, I think having it more accessible to smaller SMEs would be great, because I see all of the, especially the clean in place system, that's just amazing. And for that to be available to businesses such as ours, and of course, it's incredibly technically complex. And I imagine the price is extremely justifiable based on everything that goes into it. But, the dream would be for SMEs to be able to access those systems as they become more widespread. And I think that happens with technologies as we progress over time. But that's really things that increase the safety of the product, where it's a public health concern, supporting all manufacturers to ensure they're producing the safest food possible, I think is something that I would envision. And we can do that through technology. So having those basic things available to all would benefit all of the Canadian food manufacturing sector in general.
Thank you for that, Nadia. And Sean, what do you see? Because you're on the cusp of a lot of the automation that you're seeing in the future. So what do you see?
Yeah, I think it's that push upstream. There's been this whole we call it the wet area, which is a real general term, but that space in the food manufacturing process where you're bringing in raw ingredients, you're bringing in raw materials, and then you're combining those materials or performing processes to those materials to create the sellable product. There have been very dedicated pieces of automation for blending, for mixing, things of that nature. I think with humans on either side of that process, always monitoring, always watching. To Wayne's point or solution, I think that lights out manufacturing mentality, there is a push in that direction. And as solutions are brought to the marketplace to solve some of these things that have always been human operator roles, you're going to get closer and closer to seeing parts of the factory that don't run with the lights on. That's not unthinkable. That has happened in other industries. I think that's coming to food in the not so distant future.
Thank you for that, Sean. And last word goes to you, Wayne, on what do you see the future for microfactories?
I see the future really for food production leaving the confines of the walls of the big factory. I see robotics going out into the field, living beside people that don't normally work with automation, really a push from robotics being in a centralized place to being out in the field where it can have a lot of local impact. That's the big trend that I see coming, and lights out operation, as Sean said, is a huge part of that.
Thank you, everyone. And Nithya, I guess we're kind of out of time for questions today.
Yes, we are, but we will get back to the people who've asked questions over email, and hopefully that helps. If not, we also have another webinar coming up next month, and I do hope you can join us. And hopefully we'll get some of your questions addressed at that time at least. I just want to thank all our panelists, Nadia Andrew-Chow, Sean Wells, Wayne McIntyre, and our moderator, Jim Beretta, for this wonderful, wonderful discussion, despite all our technical difficulties. As well as I want to thank our sponsor, Biomera, for their support in putting together today's webinar. A quick reminder for the audience that a recorded video of this presentation and discussion will be emailed to you over the next few days. And as I mentioned, our next webinar is on April the 5th, and we're going to be focusing on new and emerging food and F&B processing technologies. So please do join us for that. And before you leave, please share your feedback about this webinar in the survey that will pop up after the broadcast ends. Thank you for your attention and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.